What's going on, everybody? Mortem here, this time bringing you my 2024 impressions of The Witcher 3. A notable absence from my catalog of reviews at this point, though I am certainly no stranger to it overall, which we'll get to in a second. But nonetheless, while I have covered The Witcher 1 and 2 on the channel, The Witcher 3 has been on my to-do list for quite some time in terms of a review, largely because I've already played and 100% this game years ago, back in 2019 actually. I played it extensively. It's one of my most played games on Steam, with about 350 something hours prior to starting work for this. And not only did I play it a ton back then, well before I was doing YouTube full-time, I actually made some videos for it as well, including a build called the Spellblade that I used for my Death March run that was really fun and likely what I'll be using here as well. So all of that to tell you, I know The Witcher 3 very well. In spite of that, however, there is actually some stuff in the game I have not seen, and this is specifically because of the update last year, which was the big next-gen update. Although I think technically speaking it launched like right at the end of 2022, but nonetheless the recent-ish next-gen update. That particular update brought with it a host of graphical improvements, a bit of combat rebalancing, a new quest, a host of quality of life features such as instantly picking herbs, just to name a few. So if only because of that, it should be fun to go back through this game, experiencing what is kind of like a soft remaster. And while plenty of people have said plenty of things about The Witcher 3, and I myself enjoy it a great deal, it does actually do a host of things I'm not that fond of. Starting right away with its story. You see, The Witcher 2, one of my favorite stories in gaming, and honestly my favorite Witcher overall, had 16 different endings. All of those would have been extremely hard to account for in this third game, and thus The Witcher 3 throws most of that out the window almost immediately. While you can decide a bunch of choices from that previous game, most of those choices either simply don't really matter, or offer only a few lines of dialogue here and there, which is a real bummer to see. Now there are a couple of decisions that can be a little more impactful, like for instance you can meet Letho in The Witcher 3, if he of course didn't die in 2, but regardless of your choices in that game, the heavily foreshadowed invasion by Nilfgaard from the south has happened, facing little resistance with a very softened up northern kingdoms, only for, during the winter months, Redania to do something unexpected, which was to assault its neighbor Kedwin, taking over the country and consolidating its power. And while they weren't able to defeat the Empire, they were able to fight them to a stalemate, which is the current state of affairs when our side of things, with Geralt, comes to a bit of a head as he's finally gotten word from Yennefer after reclaiming his memories, only for, upon meeting her, to be summoned by the Emperor of Nilfgaard himself and sent on the trail of Ciri, his adopted daughter, and Emir's literal daughter, which of course forms the bulk of the story. Now currently I'm all the way through White Orchard, which is the big starting area, which is itself like 5 to 10 hours of content, so I'll save the rest for the review. But just some notable things in terms of impressions there. Probably the biggest thing I remember from my original playthrough of this game, which coincidentally I actually still have a save file of. I always keep a ton of save files for everything I do just because of the nature of my job as a content creator these days, but while I knew I had save files from my previous run-throughs with this game, I forgot just how many of them I had, and it looks like I saved one from my original playthrough that honestly I don't even know if it would load. But nonetheless, even from all the way back then, The Witcher 3's story is quite long, especially your first time through. In my initial playthrough, I remember being like 80 or 90 hours deep into the story and still only just doing the Skellige stuff, when I thought to myself that this was taking an extremely long time. But by that point I had explored most everything on the map, so from there it was a little easier to knock things out. And that's not even including its 2 very expansive expansions, which add even more content. So The Witcher 3 is a very large game, and while much of that world is filled with honestly a lot of really great, impactful main and side quests, another large portion of that world is also filled with, well, filler for lack of a better term, with there being just tons of little monster nests and mini dungeons to find your way into that really don't offer much outside of just like a small thing to tick off your to-do list, which is usually where the game is at its weakest, especially since The Witcher 3 here made a lot of changes to the formula in this particular game that saw things being a bit streamlined. For instance, you don't really prepare prepare that much for combat here in the ways you did compared to the earlier games, where setting up your potions and oils was a big deal. Now they're just hotkeyed. You don't even have to meditate to do alchemy or anything. You can just do it straight from a menu wherever. And changes like that can make the overall fantasy of being a Witcher a bit toned down in comparison to the first couple of titles, at least in my opinion, which I tell you to mention that I don't think The Witcher 3 is perfect. It's a great game, obviously, but playing it almost 10 years from its initial release, with a bit of a new perspective, I would say that there's definitely parts of this game that I don't remember super fondly. For instance, in addition to being able to craft alchemy wherever, in order to craft anything for blacksmithing, you have to go to 2 separate types of blacksmiths, and there's also just a metric ton of materials to manage there in order to craft things, which you're almost certainly going to want to do because the best stuff is the crafted Witcher set gear, which you're going to need a craftsman to make, but that very same gear that you're going to be after also invalidates a huge chunk of the constant loot barrage that you're going to be getting from enemies, dropping everything from like basic swords and the like that add literally nothing to the game 90% of the time because most of it is useless. So all in all, for the sake of a quick impressions video before I work on the full review, playing this again so many years after its release and after I initially 100%ed it, it's an interesting, somewhat mixed bag, honestly. So something I didn't mention up to this point is the next-gen update has caused some crashing and stuff that I haven't experienced in a while, so while it does look amazing, it also does randomly crash occasionally, so I'll have to see if I can fix that in any way. And a few other things I've already mentioned, but then there's other places where there are clear improvements graphically and just a small quality of life stuff, again with the herbs for instance. But mostly I think this is going to be a bit of a fun trip down memory lane for me, while also evaluating an older game that I loved with fresh eyes and taking a look at how some of this game has aged and how some of it hasn't, as not to break anybody's heart, but here on May 19th this game will be 9 years old, so it should be fun to do both that and also share my opinions on this very, very well-known title, so I can finally get it added to my ever-growing catalog of reviewed games, as my overall goal as a channel really is to be able to provide a video about any game people might want my opinion on, and thus this was an inevitable stop at some point. So I'm just glad there will actually be some new things for me to check out. So while I don't expect this to be a quick run through the game, I would say that it probably won't take me as long as people expect, just because, again, my own familiarity with it, and the fact that I've already 100%'d the game, so realistically I just need to play through it, its 2 expansions, to gather the footage, refresh my memory, experience all the new stuff with the next-gen update before compiling the review, but that in and of itself is still no small task, so even dedicating my time to it, I think this is going to take in the ballpark of like 2 weeks. So I certainly hope you stick around and enjoy that review, but for right now, that's pretty much going to cover it. So I hope you enjoyed this video. Do let me know if you have anything to say about The Witcher 3, or just any general questions about what I know about the game, I guess. Which of course means to like, comment, subscribe, all that YouTube jazz, but regardless of any of that, truly, just thank you so much for watching. I really do appreciate it. May you wander in wisdom and have an amazing day.